Few things are for sure in this life, but this is. If we live for any substantial amount of time, we will encounter grief due to the loss of a loved one. Not something any of us ever want, and we all handle it differently. This podcast is to feature those who have done purposeful and meaningful things through their grief. These people featured on here are normal folks, just like you and me, who were thrust into a place they never wanted to be in their lives. A painful place. As they move through their pain, they realize that something worthwhile, something for the greater good could come out of the unthinkable. I'm sure that none of them would ever consider themselves to be a hero, but when I searched the definition of the word hero, I found this: a person who is admired or idolized for courage, outstanding achievements, or noble qualities. And that fit. And so it's my privilege to bring you the remarkable stories of these heroes in grief. Hi, everyone. This is Tom, your host for the Heroes in Grief podcast, and the response has been incredible so far, and I want to thank you for that. It's getting out to people, and they're letting us know that it's helping them, and that is what it's all about. I want to make you aware of a way that you can support this podcast without having to spend 1 cent, and that is through affiliate marketing. I've set up affiliate marketing for online shopping. If you do online shopping, then I have links to all the major retailers, most of them anyways, and I can provide them for you so that when you buy online through those links, you'll help support the podcast through the percentages that we get. It doesn't cost you anything more. You just shop like you regularly would on the sites that you love. It's very easy. All you have to do is shop. And that's it. Just let me know the links to the places that you want to shop at, and I will provide the affiliate links so that you can do it. If you want more information on this, you can go to heroesingrief.com. It takes you to the Linktree page where a video explains it in a little more detail. But you can always email me at tom@heroesingrief.com, and I can answer questions for you. But you can support the podcast that way, and it's very easy, very simple, and it doesn't cost you a cent. Isn't that great? Thank you. Now here's today's episode. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Heroes in Grief. And today I've got Gwen Mysiak with me, and hopefully Jonathan will make it too. Jonathan McGrath, I'm sorry, with TH at the end. Gwen and Jonathan, they are both part of two fantastic organizations here in Western New York, where I reside. And I'm in Niagara Falls right now, but from the Buffalo area. And so we're going to tell you all about those things. But the biggest focus on the new venture, and that is the Western New York Compassion Connection, WNY, compassionconnection.org. You can look it up right now and find it. And Gwen's going to tell us all about it, of course. Gwen is the executive director of the P.U.N.T, Pediatric Cancer Collaborative, and Jonathan is the assistant director of that. So that is an organization that they were part of. Gwen and I talked shortly, not too long after Jeff passed, my son, and Gwen had a heart for the community and to have bereavement services available for people free of charge. And I saw that in her for sure. I shared it, but at that time it was so fresh for me. I didn't know what I was doing. That's for sure. But they were very great about having me come in and talk to them. And I'm excited about what's happening for them and for this area and for this whole purpose of what we do with all of this stuff. So welcome, Gwen. Thanks for joining Heroes in Grief. I appreciate it.
Oh, Tom, thank you so much for having me. I truly wish there wouldn't have been reason for us to connect because it's of the deepest pain that we were kind of brought on this collision course. But I really admire what you've done in turning your pain to purpose in memory of your son. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk with you a little bit more in depth about things that we're both so passionate about, which is, grief support and, making our community a better place to grieve.
Absolutely. I like to, the premise of Heroes in Grief is it started with the stories from people because there's so much to gain from people's stories. So I do want to get into what both those organizations are about, of course, in a big degree, or big way. But do you have a grief story that brought you into this, or how did you get involved with P.U.N.T in the beginning? What happened with all of that?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, again, most unfortunately, I was living a very wonderful professional life at WNED, now Buffalo Toronto Public Media, where I had started right out of college doing kind of national promotion and corporate communications. I was there going on 18 years, never thinking that I would make a career change. I worked with an excellent, best-in-class team who, I just really grew up with. And my life took a very unexpected turn when my cousin, who is like a sister to me, her then 13-year-old, went in for what we thought was outpatient hernia surgery. His name was Andrew, and he was a middle schooler in Orchard Park. And I will never forget the phone call that I received that afternoon from his mom telling me that it wasn't a hernia, that they had found what they believed to be cancer. The next day, we did a scan and saw that it was fully metastasized cancer. And then the third day, the pathology came back, and we learned that it was a very rare sarcoma that was very difficult to survive. So in the blink of an eye, our family was thrust into this completely unthinkable journey of a 13-year-old, seemingly pretty healthy, normal boy, and finding out that he was riddled with what would be terminal cancer. So I was very front lines with Andrew's battle, whether it be, going up to the hospital or reinforcing the home front. Andrew had a younger brother and a younger sister. And so it did change the lens, of everything. I was with Andrew the day he died. And actually along that journey, we met Brian Moorman, who was the then Bills Punter, who had developed this very kind of small but mighty organization that was really, about his passion to give back. And so he would come up to the hospital and do visits, and he became aware of Andrew's situation, was able to do some really nice things when Andrew was end of life. So I would meet him at Andrew's funeral and thank him for that, and express interest in being on a board or doing more to support pediatric cancer in the wake of our loss. That very unexpectedly resulted in a cup of coffee several months later, him letting me know that he didn't think he would be in the community or playing for the Bills, that season. And kind of on a whim, I made the decision to leave my role at WNED and just take over as executive director to see if I could kind of evolve it into a next level nonprofit public charity that would, be able to serve families facing pediatric cancer. And so that's
so Brian, I'm sorry, excuse me. Brian had something going already in that regard, because of course, many football players, they have charitable organizations they're already doing for the community and things. Was something in place already?
Yes. So he had started, a nonprofit. Again, they did a lot of grocery cards and things. It didn't have a ton of formality, but it had existed and was created. And then, so we, again, kind of that fateful collision course, because I came with a lot of nonprofit professional experience and, the passion that was fueled from the loss of Andrew, who died when he was 15. And so, I always say that I will be forever grateful to WNED's CEO, who had been a tremendous mentor to me because, he gave me incredible flexibility. I was doing very high level national work. And when I sat in front of him to tell him that I thought I was going to kind of go try to run this small nonprofit, he said two things. The first is, you go with no risk because I'll hire you back, which gave me a lot of faith to make a leap. And the second thing was, tell me how I can help you in this. What can we do to support you? So sometimes I get more credit than I deserve for kind of this, career switch I made. And I will say I did, jump out of a plane, but I had a parachute. I'm so grateful that I did, because it did give me kind of the courage, to step out and do something very unexpected. And it's become an honor of my life to serve as executive director of P.U.N.T, going on 13 years now. And one of the first things I realized when I sat down with the psychologists at the hospital, the social workers, and seeing it in my own family, Tom, was what a lack of support there was in the realm of bereavement. So when a child is fighting cancer, the phone is ringing. There's a lot of diversionary activities, many wonderful nonprofits in our community who are there to take their mind off of cancer and provide a wonderful quality of life. And all of those programs are mostly patient-centered, so when that patient is gone, there's no logical or, formal way for those organizations to continue serving that family, even though they always stay connected in their hearts, certainly. So I knew kind of quickly that one thing P.U.N.T should do to address a major gap in service was develop a bereavement program. So I got to work and I did identify a couple wonderful programs nationally that we kind of sought to emulate. One of them was the J Fund, which Tom Coughlin was the coach of the New York Giants and the Jaguars. He started a nonprofit when he was coaching in Jacksonville, and they had a retreat, a Remembrance Weekend retreat. And so I reached out to their executive director to get more information. She invited me to attend it. And, my first year as executive director of P.U.N.T, I went down and I was so moved by this concept of a retreat for families who had lost a child to cancer and saw the power of it. I spoke to many families that weekend who told me how life-changing it had been, what an anchor it was to support, them along their grief journey. So within a few months, we had our first here in Western New York in Ellicottville at Holiday Valley, called Remembrance Weekend. And we had over 25 families come who had suffered a loss to pediatric cancer. Some were 2 months out, some were 10 years out. And as you know, grief is a life sentence, and the pain and the bravery that people brought that Friday that they checked into the Tamarack Club was something that I'll never forget. And so that's kind of when we were off and running with the power of peer support, and our organization kind of never looked back. And all of that has continued to evolve to the point where now we've opened the region's first peer support family grief center, thanks to a state grant. So there's a lot I skipped in between, but that's sort of, how it started and where we are. So that's kind of the frame up for, how P.U.N.T got in the business of, serving bereaved people, and, how now we've grown to the point where we recognized that we really could be in a position to bring a much needed service beyond the bounds of pediatric cancer to any origin of loss.
I am a big advocate of the peer-to-peer support model. I had a bad experience with a regular formal therapist when I first started with things, as some do, as people do sometimes, but they're not trained all the time in grief work. So that's common. It could be common. And so I got help online from a peer-to-peer group. And that's what led me into all that I'm doing now, really, because of that support from people. So I'm a big advocate of that, and I think it can be very effective and just as effective for people, for sure.
Yeah.
So, so you got a grant for, it's the, do you like to say Western New York Compassion Connection or WNY, or because I know that's the website, actually.
Yeah. So to kind of, again, just explain it a little bit more deeply. So Western New York Compassion Connection is a service of P.U.N.T, Pediatric Cancer Collaborative. So all of the grants that we've been receiving are coming to P.U.N.T, as an established public charity for over 13 years. And so we've gotten a DBA for Western New York Compassion Connection because we don't want, again, pediatric cancer is hard enough. We don't necessarily want to keep like a grief center alongside a pediatric cancer programming, and let that serve as a reminder. So we've kind of launched Western New York Compassion Connection as a service of P.U.N.T, but then as it takes hold, we will kind of back P.U.N.T out of it and keep them a little bit more compartmentalized, just because we do have 5 programs that serve families in a pediatric cancer battle. And then we have our bereavement facet of our organization. So we want a little separation there, as you can probably, understand. So, so Western New York Compassion Connection is a service of P.U.N.T. It's coming from grants that we've received. Most notably, we received a $500,000 state grant. And I'll tell you, it was very driven on data, the need. Western New York was characterized as a grief desert. I've been connected with people at the national level, when we had the mass shooting, the blizzard deaths, people were trying to send reinforcements to our area and had no real formal way to enter the community because there's over 200 grief centers in our country, and not one of them, were here. So there's one in Erie, that is very similar to our model. But we are doing this as a service of P.U.N.T, but it's for any origin of loss. And like I said, we're going to back kind of the P.U.N.T brand, if you will, out of it as these months go by. And, so people can support it directly. And, but that's kind of how it's all structure-wise working.
Mm-hmm. And so people know there is an actual building that you have in
Yes.
Lancaster, New York, and it's a beautiful building. I've been there, fortunately, and it has. Why don't you explain a little bit about the building and the rooms and everything else that you have set up there?
Yeah, thank you. So again, this went from, I would say, a little bit of a pipe dream to a very, real vision coming to light. I should back it up again. So, P.U.N.T was running our bereavement program for every year we would have our annual retreat. The families developed beautiful relationships. The network was strong. Over the years, we would get calls about like, could I come? My child didn't die of cancer. We would very, regret having to say no. Unfortunately, pediatric cancer
Mm-hmm.
is our mission. But then, we really, as one of our board members jumped into expanding that retreat to year-round activities for families. Her name is Terry Carbone. We really started to kind of see the power of what we were doing and want to work more broadly. And then again, this took another very personal turn. March of 2022, I woke up to, again, terrible, unthinkable news that my then 19-year-old daughter's two best friends were killed in a car crash in Lancaster, and in the blink of an eye, they were gone. And so having to tell my daughter this news, and just thinking about those families and thinking, how will they ever survive this? Where are they going to find their people? How are they going to find their people? I knew the power of peer support and what it was doing for pediatric cancer loss, but it just was very quickly became unacceptable to me, through that personal lens again, that, we need more. Why don't we have more? So I have a wonderful former colleague of mine who now runs the New York Life Foundation in Manhattan. And Tom, New York Life gives $6 million plus out in childhood bereavement to grief centers and to research. They are the top funder in the nation for childhood bereavement. So Heather, when she saw the news of what had happened to my daughter's friends, reached out to me and she said, I'm going to connect you. There's a lot of national organizations, grief centers that have so many resources for you to share. And then she said, I'm going to do one better. I'm going to send you to the National Alliance for Grieving Children conference in a couple weeks and on a scholarship. And I want you to go and I want you to meet these people and really see nationally what exists and what you could, potentially bring back to your community. So again, a very fateful couple of days I spent in Orlando, Florida. Part of that conference was a tour of a grief center called New Hope for Kids. And so we were all bused to New Hope for Kids. And I walked into the front doors of that place and I just couldn't believe that something like that existed. It was a peer support grief center for, children and families with these beautiful rooms, that were outfitted based on developmental age, and a parent meeting rooms and beautiful grounds and, free and, all of it. So, I came back on a very, very fervent mission to, I joke often, like if you were talking to me in the summer of 2022, whether we were in the deli line at Wegmans or sitting around a fire pit at a backyard barbecue or in a work meeting or, walking down the street, I was probably going to tell you about this amazing concept and how we need a grief center in Western New York. So seeing the pain that, again, my daughter's friends' families were struggling with and knowing, what our own population dealt with, we really started to plant seeds. Jonathan, our assistant director, lost his son to pediatric cancer. I knew him when he was on the corporate side and then reconnected with him when his son was on life support in the PICU. So, we have a bereaved dad and, on our team every day, the mission lives here, so we started to really start to plant seeds. And then in, again, the most unthinkable twist of irony, September 6th, 2022, I was first day of school for my younger kids, totally normal day. My husband and I were at the bus stop, waved goodbye to the kids. I ran off to work without saying goodbye. We had our gala for P.U.N.T that Saturday, and it was a Tuesday, and I was very stressed about everything that we had looking ahead to the work week to get ready for our biggest fundraiser of the year. And I would receive a call midday from my daughter, screaming in horror that her father was unconscious. And by the time I would get home from work that day, I would be a 50-year-old widow. My husband suffered a widowmaker heart attack doing a routine workout in our basement home gym during his lunch hour. He worked from home with no warning at all, 6'4", healthy guy. And so in the blink of an eye, I became a grieving mother of 3 bereaved children. I had just learned about all the data, how at risk bereaved children are, Tom. I mean, I don't want to go on too long about this, but the data really told the story for us to open Western New York Compassion Connection. And we just got updated data a couple weeks ago at that same conference. 1 in 4 suicide deaths is a bereaved child. There's 157% higher rate of substance misuse in bereaved children, 157%. So, grief support for families isn't nice, it's imperative. And, so again, back to 2022, had all this data. Now, our story here at P.U.N.T was even more compelling, unfortunately, because it's the work we do, Jonathan's story, my story. So a lot of people started listening with both ears, to what we had to say. And, that did result in the combination of all of this and us securing a $500,000 state grant from then Assembly Member Monica Wallace, who really understood why a grief center would be important and gave us, the funds we needed to get going. So that was just last May, so May of 2024, that we received that grant. And within a year, we took up residence at 3966 Walden Avenue, which used to be a former daycare center that, very ironically, my eldest 2 children went to. And my husband helped the director get the financing to buy that building 20 some years ago. And now P.U.N.T is in the process, thanks to a very generous donation from the Paul Safran Foundation, of securing ownership of that building. So within 3 years, we will own it outright. But it's a beautiful 6,800 square foot former daycare that we have renovated to be a beautiful, safe space of hope and help. So again, that was a very long answer to your question, but we have this space now, Western New York Compassion Connection. We named it that because compassion quite literally means to suffer together. And we are a peer support center. So, we're developing very strong mental health referral partnerships, but, our core mission is not mental health one-on-one talk therapy, grief counseling. It's really bringing people together and building a network of support, of peer support around grief. And so we start working, we have a little lanterns room for kids ages 5 to 8. We have a Pathfinders room for 8 to 12. We have an amazing teen lounge for ages, 13 up. And then we have 2 beautiful parent meeting rooms. So we can have sessions running at the same time. When our family sessions occur, a family comes together and we share a meal, and then they go in their respective rooms. So they have their own time together with peers, who understand. We've trained up over 35 volunteers. We do a very rigorous training with grief literacy and teaching people how to be peer support facilitators. So we're really amazed at how many people have already stepped out to get trained to volunteer at our center. And all those groups are run by volunteers then.
Yeah, it just shows the need, doesn't it? When those people are just like, they're like almost chomping at the bit to get to something to help in that way, for sure.
Yes.
So what does a day look like at the center? Because I know you got a lot of programs going on and everything. And so just want to paint a picture for everybody. If they're wondering, do they have to call? Do they have to set up to be part of a group? Can they just walk in? What does it look like there?
Yeah. So again, we're about 2 months old. So I keep saying we're building the plane as we're flying it. And we have been completely humbled and overwhelmed by the receptivity. I think we thought we would have to do a lot more grief literacy education in the community to get people to understand what this is and why it's important. That hasn't been the case at all. We have school, districts that are clamoring to, work together to get better skills, workplaces, grief literacy in the workplaces. And so that's part of our role. There's 3 key positions at Western New York Compassion Connection. 2 of them, are social work backgrounds. So, again, we're not a clinic or clinical, but we do have people with very high level experience that are kind of like, keeping the train, on the tracks there. So we are at the center itself. There is a mix of peer support groups by origin of loss. There's workshops like art therapy, journaling, things like that. And then there's just social events. So just opportunities for people to come together with no structure at all. We just had our first family session. So a lot of our groups run in the evenings, recognizing that people are working. Some of those groups, just to give you an idea, we have Light After Loss to Suicide group for parents who have lost children to suicide. We're working on developing in conjunction with some community partners our overdose loss group. We have a group that's meeting that is just for, this actually was something that popped up after the center opened, and we were getting so many phone calls from older adult parents who had lost an adult child, especially, people sometimes, Tom, in their, 70s that didn't have a safe space to talk about their grief, because very much generation society said, you're not weak, you're strong, you got to stuff it down, get on with it, get over it, move through your grief, all these, fallacies that people just have been taught to believe that, grief is some process that you like start and end, So we have a group called Forever My Child for older adult loss. We're doing a dad's group. It's meeting tonight. We have over 12 dads that started coming right away. And we were just saying, the first night we didn't know how it would be. The dads got going and we kind of let it go. It was supposed to be an hour. Then it went an hour and a half. Then we kind of had to go home. So we had to kind of say thank you for coming. And we closed up the grief center and walked in the parking lot. So many dads were still talking in the parking lot, So things, that's just 4 dads, by dad. So, and then we have a similar program on Thursday mornings called Cups of Comfort, which is a bereaved mom coffee hour. So we encourage people to those things. You can just come, because we know that with grieving, sometimes you don't know how you're going to feel, and it's scary to make a commitment and then have, some of those things. Our center's open during the workday if people want to just come to say hello and get a little tour. But most of the peer support groups are in the evenings, just, so people that are working can be accommodated. But in our introductory family group, we had 17 children and 11 parents that came. Out of the 11 parents, the vast majority of them were very young widows. We had one brave widower in the group. And we also had a couple who had lost one of their children last summer. And so we worked with them for 7 weeks. And now they will kind of fall into our ongoing group. And then we'll start another intro group in the fall. So I know this is a lot. We do have a website that we constantly update. We have social media platforms. But, Western New York Compassion Connection will be what the community needs. We're going to be really responsive to that. And again, we're building our outreach component to be as assertive, I guess, as what we've got going on within the 4 walls of the Grief Center. Because, and Tom, I know you understand this, and we say this almost every day when we're doing tours, we can create the most beautiful grief sanctuary and paint it beautiful colors and have wonderful furniture and provide a nourishing meal and have soft music playing and all of the things. But, if those people walk out our front door back to their jobs, back to school communities that are not grief sensitive, all we've done is just provide a place to hide. And that's unacceptable to us. So we're working, again, as ardently on developing the community outreach piece of this for grief literacy, as we are with what happens at the center.
Hello, friends. I just wanted to take a brief break here in the podcast to make you aware of a very exciting partnership that Heroes in Grief has just formed, and that is with Get Griefy Magazine. I'm going to let their founder and editor-in-chief, Kara Sanchez, tell you all about it.
Hey, Heroes in Grief listeners. Life after loss isn't easy, but it can be colorful and full of possibilities. Meet Get Griefy Magazine, a vibrant resource filled with inspiring stories of life after loss, expert advice, and voices from everyday grievers and thought leaders. Together, they're here to help guide you toward the side of life that's left to be lived fully and authentically. Dive into Get Griefy for free on issue or snag a print copy on Amazon. Connect with us on Instagram at Get Griefy Magazine or visit getgriefymagazine.com to explore, join our thriving small business collective, or discover advertising opportunities. Let's embrace life after loss boldly and together.
And now back to our episode. Yeah, and I shared with you when I was there that night that that is my heart for sure. I think we need to be more proactive in the grief conversation and help people out there. So one thing I was thinking about, it's in Lancaster, which is a suburb of the Buffalo area. And it's, oh my gosh, it's such a huge, I know you're seeing it already. The need is so big and so huge. How do you handle when needs come from the inner city and those type of things? And I know you probably got plans to to penetrate all of that for sure, but it can't all happen at once.
Yes.
It's got to be tough.
No, thank you for asking. And I know we are paying close attention to just that, the accessibility issue. And we do have some really great partnerships we forged. Peace Incorporated, a wonderful woman named Teresa Evans, who runs that for homicide loss. We've had meetings with the Buffalo Public Schools. We're really, really working on, marginalized communities, again, accessibility. In the short term, we have a grant from Kelly for Kids Foundation for Uber gift cards and gas gift cards, to help people be able to get to the center. Our hope is in short order, and we've written some grants to have a shuttle. Many grief centers have shuttles and volunteer drivers. And then we also have a wonderful space. I'm actually here right now, right on Main Street in downtown Buffalo for our P.U.N.T programs. We're right off the medical campus, 712 Main. And we have the space here to be able to do peer support groups right outside, right here at 712 Main. So we've got one in the works for July. So again, we ideally would love to be able to make sure that our center is accessible, especially because for grieving children, we have every room, as you saw, has play therapy areas, and our teen room has bubble hockey and air hockey and a shuffleboard table, because some of the power is just in those organic, being alongside somebody and not saying a word, just being together, looking into each other's eyes. Just knowing on those hard days, gee, I'm not the only one whose dad died. It happened to, Jordan and to Luke and to Jake, and, I'm not alone, so the shuttle and then the Uber gift cards are two ways that we're really working to be able to provide accessibility and, these amazing community partnerships that we're forging with people that are working so hard to serve their own respective populations and missions is, something else that is going to be key.
Yeah, that's why it's so great to hear the response for the volunteers. And I did see a post up about that, your training sessions and everything.
Yeah,
and it's
unbelievable. Yeah. We had such a quality group. We didn't promote extensively because, again, we were just getting going and we didn't want to kind of have more than we could manage in a quality manner. But the 24 people we had come, Tom, we had lawyers, we had healthcare professionals, we had teachers, we had students, we had, bereaved parents that, just knew that this was going to be their way to help and give back, as they've gotten through their grief journey and, learned so much along the way. So we just couldn't get over other nonprofits. We had somebody come from Rochester, who's looking to replicate what we're doing for their pediatric cancer charity. And so they had 3 nights of training, and, we take it very seriously. The first night is really grief literacy training, all the data we've received, the language, people in grief. And I know you've probably heard, just an example, don't ever say at least. If you're going to say at least, don't say it. At least you have other children. At least you had, 25 years. At least he didn't suffer. At least you got to say goodbye. If you're going to say, those types of things, even language surrounding death, there's a real push now to kind of banish the term committed suicide, because committed puts the onus on, the person who died. Many times they don't mean to die. They just want to be out of pain. And, people commit crimes, but we really try hard to say died by suicide and not, perpetuate that stigma of a suicide death that's so often misunderstood. Another thing we really try to teach with language is just the importance of getting rid of the platitudes that are so hollow to grievers. I'm so sorry for your loss. You're in my prayers. how about, how are you feeling today? How was Father's Day for you, Tom? It must be so hard for you to navigate Father's Day without your son here. How was Father's Day for you? Really being specific, really trying to validate people to learn, how they are. And sometimes it's just, listening, not trying to fix it. We also talk a lot about toxic positivity in this realm, the bright-siding things that sometimes just alienate people in grief, so that's part of our training the first day. On the second day, is more going through age groups and how data shows children process grief and maybe what they need at each developmental stage, right from little on up. And then the third day, it's that like the tools of peer support facilitation, how to run a group, what to do if you have a hijacker, somebody that just needs to be heard so much that they kind of upend the dynamics of the conversation, the reflective listening tools, which I'm not doing a very good job of right now because I know I'm talking a lot. So I'm really sorry.
No, this is all about you, so don't worry.
Okay, all right. Well, so we, that's a big part, so again, the training, and even if you just want to volunteer watering the plants at the Grief Center, the training is required of us because you're going to be around grieving people. And, we don't want, again, sometimes those, and it's nobody's fault, Tom. It's just a society. We live in this death denying culture. Even if you're studying to be a mental health counselor or a social worker, usually grief and loss courses are elective. You don't have to take them, so even when we were interviewing for positions, it's tough to find people that really have an expertise. I know you did David Kessler training, there's some things that exist, but by and large, people feel woefully unequipped to be supporting the grieving people in their lives. And they're desperate to do better, and so I think with what you're doing, with what we're doing, we're on the road to, equipping people with the language and the tools they need. And I do believe that's going to have a really, really positive, meaningful ripple effect.
Yeah, that's what I mean about the proactive approach, to get it more introduced into our early upbringing and everything else to make it more normalized, because you're going to encounter it if you don't leave this earth before, you do encounter it. So it's like, wouldn't you be better equipped to be around a grieving person, to be a grieving person, whatever the case is, with those tools already in hand? It doesn't eliminate the pain or anything like that, but it's going to help you to process it in whatever way you're encountering it,
Yes.
And we do a very poor job at that right now, for sure.
We do. We had
everything's reactionary,
Oh, right. Even school communities, it's really unacceptable that every school is not required to have a protocol in place when there's a death in a school community. I mean, there's no bigger life disruptor than a death. And, I did, say, for some school districts, if you're having academic difficulties or other challenges, those reinforcements are there. They exist. We can get you the IEP or, the special plans for learning. But when a child suffers the death of a parent or a sibling or a teacher dies, or, many, many times it's kind of that crisis, like cobble it together on the fly, or, counselors are on hand for a couple days. I mean, how much shock buffers pain, it's not the couple days after that people need the support. And for children, it needs to follow them their entire school career, because how they process their loss is ongoing based on their developmental stage. My daughter was 11 when her dad died, her first day of 6th grade. She's now going into high school, and my son was a freshman and now he's going to be a senior. And again, they're constantly having a different relationship with their grief based on where they're at in life, and I was thinking, when we had our ribbon cutting at Western Year Compassion Connection, I opened my remarks, when we had media, and, so glad our county executive was there. And, I basically started off by saying, like, this is important because you're going to die. And so is every single person that you love. And, there was kind of a, horror in the room, but we intentionally wanted to move the needle at that opportunity, to start saying, like, we have to normalize these conversations because death is a part of life. And the more we accept that and we start to kind of live day to day with that fact in our minds, and, the easier it's going to be for people to navigate these journeys. And again, people will stop anesthetizing their pain because they feel so misunderstood or isolated because nobody knows how to treat them, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm sure you see it, it's like, you hate being alone when you're grieving, but the thought of walking into a social event where everybody's making chit chat and small talking, like, you got to really get yourself in a mindset to just coexist with people that are, I guess, like, having a normal social interaction
Yeah.
when you're grief stricken.
And to
Or,
handle questions and that kind of thing that will come at you.
yes. Or, the other side of that is, you and I know we're both very considerate people, right? You don't want to bring your pain to somebody's graduation party
Mm-hmm.
because the minute you walk in the door, you represent worst case scenario of something and you suck the life out of the room and people get uncomfortable. And, so where does that leave us as grievers? Either sitting home feeling sorry for ourselves, stuffing it down to go to something just so we have something to do, and potentially knowing that not only you have your own pain, but now you have the discomfort of making others uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So much of this can be avoided if we just integrated grief literacy and sensitivity into our everyday lives. And it's there's so much work to be done, but this, and hopefully people out
That
there,
statement at the ribbon cutting, that shouldn't be shocking to them.
right.
Right.
Right. And deep down inside, we know they know, but it's just, again, nobody's speaking it out loud,
Yeah.
And another thing, we say this a lot when we're doing so, and the tissue boxes at our grief center, we actually got a sticker to put on them, and it says crying releases stress hormones. Okay. So what happens when somebody starts crying? 9 times out of 10, the person who is crying is going to apologize profusely out of what? Embarrassment and shame that your child died, that your husband died, that you're sad today. But, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. What we're pretty much saying is, I'm sorry because I know I'm making you feel really awkward right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the flip side of that is, we, to support somebody who's crying, immediately, oh, it's okay. It's okay. No, don't cry. Take the tissues here. Stop crying. Right? We're sending these messages to stop it. And yet crying is what our biologically is like the best way to kind of release those stress hormones, to get back to a baseline, to get your physiological self back to homeostasis, and for whatever reason, we've been taught that this is a bad thing to do. So people won't cry, or they'll do whatever they can not to cry, which, again, sometimes when you're beating it down is when you're choosing some really destructive ways to cope,
Yeah. And if that person around that person had better understanding of things,
yes,
grief just happens. I'm just grieving. I'm crying. I'm just grieving. You didn't do anything to cause that.
Right.
There's nothing you can really do about it, but I'm just crying. And that can happen, and it's okay. So,
yes. And then along those lines, and again, I'm sure you've experienced this with your son, it's people don't want to bring them up because they don't want to upset you. And yet, what do we have left of those people that we loved so fiercely in this world? Is their memory, and what a gift it is, right, to your heart when somebody tells you a story about your son, or even the sound of his name. Because as time goes on, the only thing worse than losing them would be people forgetting about them, So, giving people the courage to go up to somebody and say, I thought about Tom yesterday, I was eating an apple, and, like those things that just are such gifts to our broken hearts, but yet people will avoid those conversations because they think that they're going to activate you, and they don't want to remind you of, your sadness. And, again, those are some things we kind of work on too, with our grief education piece of it is, research shows that by and large, when you talk about somebody's deceased loved one, they're going to thank you for it because it's a great gift.
It's a favorable thing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I told you to, and my nature is to jump at things, get involved, go big all the time. And certainly since Jeff's death, I've learned to just put down the shutters on that, because I could extend myself way too far. And but I'm thinking about like what I do in the context of my life right now. I'm back to performing. I'm an entertainer at care centers and things and nursing homes. And I do that almost on a daily basis during the weekdays. So there was one of them a few years ago, before Jeff ever passed, that asked me to be a group leader for grief sessions monthly at their place. It's an adult independent living place. But this goes along with what you were saying before too, that, people think that, people down the line or whatever, that might not be a place for, grief work or whatever. But you think about the context of those people living in that community, and they are facing their own mortality for one thing. They're facing loss and the fact that they've lost their regular lifestyle and everything and moved to this community. It could be very nice there and a lot of activities and all of that. That's all good. But they've also given up that life that they had, and a lot of things have changed there. They lose people that they love in that community, and then you've got the family members of that community. So when we would hold these sessions, I'd have family members of people who are no longer there, and because they needed it as well. So it just goes to show this universality of,
Yes.
Of grief, and that it continues till the very end, that those people are just as much in need as, we are, or the younger people, so it's,
Yes.
there's such a need out there. And it just blows my mind thinking about all that you must have to go through, thinking about everything that's needed out there. It's amazing.
Well, I will say again, Western New York is already doing what Western New York does. And, there's been just such a community embrace, right from our Erie County Mental Health Commissioner to, corporate partners saying, how can we help? What can we do? Many foundations. We were the envy of a lot of grief centers across America when we were at our conference, just even saying that, Rich Family Foundation gave us a $20,000 grant for hospitality so that we can feed these families when they come in. So many solo parents walk through the door, sole income providers, solo parents to little kids, they're grieving, and they walk in and there's a beautiful dinner waiting for them. And that's the way they start their family group with us, what a gift, again. So we're just so grateful because this doesn't belong to P.U.N.T. It doesn't belong to me or Jonathan, or, it belongs to Western New York, and it's a community resource now, and again, like we keep saying, there's just so much work to be done. We just have to, just keep doing what we're doing, and, hope that, again, we're finding, even we had a wonderful meeting with West Her last week, and, bringing that grief literacy to the workplaces, that's a big one. Bereavement policy overhaul, part of back to this death denying culture, like people just put so much pressure on grieving people to get on with it, get over it, get back to work. It's been 2 weeks, it's been a month, it's been, and it's just, and then you start to look at, we do a lot, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, the physical nature of grief, right? People think grief is, it's your emotions, and it's like maybe the mental health people understand that. But when you talk about the correlation to physical issues, and how grief causes inflammation and cortisol, we showed families at P.U.N.T. MRIs of grieving brains. Your neural pathways quite literally get rewired, especially when you've gone through a traumatic or sudden death where that trap door just opens out of nowhere. Your fight or flight response, you are dysregulated physiologically, probably forever to some degree. You can't help but spiral when you hear sirens or when your kid has, a sore throat, because, that's how it started. And now, so it's people again are so hard on themselves because they don't understand this. Yeah. Grief brain, the fog of, you can't even think straight. I didn't even know my kid's birthday when I was talking to Social Security. It's like,
right.
We're trying to
forgetting things, sleep issues, they all stem from that. And you think you're going crazy.
You think you're going crazy.
Yeah.
Yep. And
there's a real thing happening. Yeah.
Yes. And now you're sleep deprived. You're not eating. You're wondering why you can't think. You're being hard on yourself because you feel like you're not doing this right, or you're not doing it well, and again, it's just so frustrating, especially when you have the lived experience we do, when you really look through the lens as a grieving parent or, a widow, and you just think like, why have we built a society that treats our grieving people this way? You go back to some of the rituals, it wasn't always like this, but somehow we just got caught up in the culture we live in now just doesn't make a lot of room for death, grief, loss, all of it, so.
Yep. And those things you're talking about help that, what we were talking about, the stuff that, your brain changes with grief, but bringing back any of those things you talked about, the physical fitness, engaging in writing, whatever it is, to start engaging your senses so that you can start rewiring or bringing your brain back to its normalcy to a degree, any of those things causes the helping of the brain in
Yeah.
those ways. So yeah,
Well,
the
and
more you can do, the better.
these kids are bringing their grief to school, and it's like they, if there's not space for it, a lot of them, again, they're struggling learning, or maybe they have behavioral issues and they're getting
Hmm.
detention, they're getting punished,
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe their attendance is an issue. And, those things that, like, again, these kids they can't be advocates for themselves often. I even know my own two teenagers, they want to be normal. They don't necessarily want to talk about the fact that their dad died, so, but yet they carry that, like, this backpack filled with cement every day they wake up, so
Yeah.
the school communities is really going to be a big focus for us, because we know, and, over the years working at P.U.N.T, if we had a child going end of life, I would often get a call from a principal or a teacher. What do we say? How do we say it? How much should we tell the
Mm,
kids? When do we tell them? All these things that poor, people are just like forced to kind of figure it out, hope they didn't do it wrong, feel guilty because maybe they did. And if they do it wrong, they're going to compound the problem instead of helping,
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
again, there's no right or wrong way to grieve, but there's a lot of research backed tools that, show that there's definitely, helpful ways to address, grief overall, and, ways that really help people along their journey. Again,
Hmm.
we're not fixing anything here, because, as we know, the only thing that would fix it is Jeff is still here, my cousin Andrew's still here, and we're back to
Yeah.
living in our bubble worlds that we lived in before, our
Yeah.
trap doors opened. So
Mm. So much work to be done.
yes, we're starting here, and I'm glad we're connected. I, again, heard such wonderful things about you even before, we met, and thank you for, creating this forum and just making this a priority of conversation.
Well, thank you. I expect to, like I said, I'm just treading water slowly to see where I'm headed with everything and let the universe take me that way. So I do want to be involved in some way with Western New York Compassion Connection. No doubt about that. It's on my heart. Everything that you're doing, we're aligned for sure in all that regard. So I have to see the role that I'm going to play, I guess, and
Yes,
that's
yes,
where it
it'll
goes.
be an honor. And as you said, I'm sure that it's I keep reminding myself, because sometimes I do feel like we should be further along, and then, like, our team will say, like, Gwen, we only opened like April 2nd.
Yeah.
But when you know the need, and you know how many people have been waiting so long for something like this, it's like, you can't get out there fast enough. But we'll both figure it out, and we'll be very honored to put your heart to work to serve you, hopefully, as a bereaved father, as you continue to move along your grief journey at the loss of Jeff. And like, just again, peer support is powerful. When you really think about it, it makes perfect sense. um, Probably, one thing I was just thinking about too, we did a child loss symposium back before we knew we would have the grief center. So we had a keynote speaker, and then we broke parents up by origin of loss. This was back in 2022. And I remember a mom coming, in her group. It was a traumatic loss group. So it was people, parents who had lost children very unexpectedly. And she was saying, she said, I was getting ready to come this morning, and I was brushing my teeth, and I looked at myself in the mirror, and I thought to myself, like, I cannot wait to look into your eyes. And she said it to the people that were sitting in the circle with her. And she said, I didn't know who you were. I didn't know why you came. I didn't know your child. But I thought to myself, just looking into your eyes might be enough for today. To just look into somebody's eyes that knows this pain and know that I'm not alone. That might be all I take away from this. That might be all I need from this, and it's just, to me, that's such a powerful anecdote of just how transformational peer support can be, when you just look into
Mhm.
the eyes of somebody, and without even speaking a word, maybe necessarily, you just know that they get it and that they understand, and I think those
Yeah.
of us living on the other side of a grief fault line, your people when you find them. I feel it with you. I know you felt, and so all we are doing, and I don't want to say all to diminish it, but it's very simple. At Western New York Compassion Connection, we are trying to build that community of support for grieving people. So they have their people. If a peer support group is working well, our volunteers are not saying a word. It's just
Hmm.
all people that need each other and are there to support each other. And that's at the essence of our mission. So.
Well, I did not know the depth of all of your losses, and I'm very sorry for all of them as well. But I think there's a great lesson in what you just talked about for both of us, because I know your energy, so I know how you go. But I think the simplicity of what she was seeking and experiencing is a lesson for both of us, and that's I commonly come back to that. That's why I put the brakes on so much, because I'm like, no. Just take what this moment, this day is offering for you, and or what opportunities are out there in that day or moment, and that's where I try to stay. So who knows?
So that's often the way forward, right?
Yeah.
Because it's too hard and scary to look ahead, especially when, again, you've been through the worst of the worst, and we just have to give ourselves what we need to get through each day, and continue to support each other.
Yeah. Gwen, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I can't wait to get it out to everybody in this area and everybody in general in the world, because the things we've talked about here are applicable anywhere, and they need to be acted upon for sure. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to the Heroes in Grief podcast. If you'd like access to any of the links that we discussed in today's show, you can find them in the show notes. There's also a link there to support the podcast if you care to. And there is an email link for me there. I'd love to hear from you and your ideas about the show, or what you thought about the show. You really can help out this podcast to get to more people if you subscribe, rate, or review it in whichever way your platform provides. Each week, Heroes in Grief is released on Sunday, so look for new episodes there. Thank you again for listening to Heroes in Grief.